On the morning of March 24th, 2020 in Jupiter, Florida, a text message pinged the phones of Gretchen Anthony's family and friends. It claimed that she had checked herself into the hospital after being diagnosed with COVID-19. At a time when the world was consumed with fear of the virus, the message seemed plausible, but something felt off. Days turned into weeks, and there was no word from Gretchen. As her loved ones began to question her whereabouts, an unthinkable betrayal was revealed. Behind the mask of a family man, her estranged husband had orchestrated a horrifying plan to make Gretchen Anthony disappear forever. Gretchen Anthony was a vibrant, kind-hearted 51-year-old woman who lived in Jupiter, Florida, a picturesque and affluent coastal town. Known for her warm demeanor and love for fitness, Gretchen worked in human resources and was well-liked by her colleagues and neighbors. She had a strong social network and was a devoted mother to her teenage daughter from a previous relationship. Gretchen's life took a turn when she met David Anthony, a former fitness trainer known for his outgoing personality and charm. David had a commanding presence, standing over 6 feet tall, with a magnetic charisma that drew people to him. The couple married in 2015, and for a time, they appeared to be the perfect pair, sharing a love for health and fitness. However, cracks in their relationship began to show as David's behavior became increasingly erratic. He struggled with personal and financial issues, which placed strain on the marriage. Friends and family described David as controlling and prone to outbursts of anger. His once charming personality gave way to manipulative tendencies, and Gretchen began to feel uneasy about their future together. By early 2020, the marriage had deteriorated beyond repair. Gretchen filed for divorce in February, marking the beginning of a contentious separation. She moved into her home on Sunset Trail while David vacated the property. The divorce proceedings were far from amicable, with David growing increasingly resentful and desperate to maintain control over Gretchen's life. As the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the United States in March 2020, tensions between Gretchen and David escalated. David's erratic behavior became more pronounced. Despite these warnings, no one could have predicted the horrifying events that would soon unfold. On the morning of March 24th, 2020, family and friends of Gretchen Anthony began receiving unexpected text messages from her phone. The messages claimed that she had checked herself into the hospital after testing positive for COVID-19. Given the global panic surrounding the pandemic, the explanation initially seemed plausible, but the messages raised immediate suspicions. Gretchen's loved ones noted inconsistencies in her writing style and phrasing, which didn't align with her usual way of communicating. As the days passed, Gretchen's friends and family grew increasingly worried. They attempted to contact her directly, but their calls went unanswered. Suspicion deepened when further messages claimed that she had been transferred to a CDC facility for special treatment. The vagueness of these texts, combined with the lack of contact, prompted Gretchen's loved ones to alert law enforcement. On March 26, 2020, police conducted a welfare check at Gretchen's home on Sunset Trail. What they found immediately set off alarms. The garage door was open, and the house was eerily silent. Inside, there were signs of a struggle. Drops of blood were discovered on the driveway, along with a shattered glass panel in the garage. Surveillance footage from Gretchen's smart home security system revealed a deeply disturbing sequence of events. The footage showed a tall man, matching David Anthony's description, entering Gretchen's home on the morning of March 21st. A woman's screams were audible, followed by a voice pleading, "What are you doing? Stop it!" The evidence strongly suggested foul play, and investigators immediately turned their attention to David Anthony. As police began piecing together the timeline, they uncovered a trail of David's increasingly unstable actions in the days following Gretchen's disappearance. On the same day Gretchen was last seen, David was spotted near a construction site, driving Gretchen's blue Mini Cooper. Witnesses described his behavior as erratic, and he appeared nervous and agitated. David's movements suggested he was attempting to avoid detection. Cell phone data placed him near Pensacola, Florida, hundreds of miles from Jupiter, just days after Gretchen's disappearance. Surveillance footage from various locations captured him using Gretchen's credit cards to make purchases, further implicating him in her disappearance. Investigators quickly realized that the messages sent from Gretchen's phone were part of an elaborate cover-up orchestrated by David. The references to COVID-19 were designed to exploit the heightened fear and isolation caused by the pandemic, delaying any immediate search efforts. This manipulation bought him crucial time to attempt to conceal his tracks. Despite his efforts, David's behavior and the mounting evidence pointed directly to his involvement. By early April, law enforcement issued a warrant for his arrest, marking the start of a nationwide search for Gretchen Anthony's estranged husband. As investigators worked to uncover the truth behind Gretchen Anthony's disappearance, a chilling series of events began to emerge. Through surveillance footage, phone records, and witness statements, law enforcement pieced together a detailed account of his actions. Gretchen's home surveillance system became one of the most critical pieces of evidence in the investigation. Footage from the morning of March 21, 2020, showed David entering her house. Shortly after, the recording captured Gretchen's desperate screams, followed by her pleading voice, begging David to stop. These sounds marked the last known moments of Gretchen's life. For investigators, this footage provided a damning glimpse into what had unfolded inside the house that day. Cell phone records revealed more about David's movements during and after the time of Gretchen's disappearance. His phone data placed him at various locations in Palm Beach County, including a remote construction site. These locations aligned with witness reports and further indicated that David had been attempting to dispose of evidence or distance himself from the crime scene. Witnesses provided additional details that supported the timeline investigators were building. A neighbor reported seeing David at Gretchen's house on the morning of her disappearance, acting agitated and moving suspiciously around the property. Another witness, an employee at a local store, recalled David using Gretchen's credit card to purchase cleaning supplies shortly after she was last seen. These purchases suggested that he was attempting to cover up the crime. The investigation also focused on Gretchen's blue Mini Cooper, which David had been seen driving after her disappearance. Law enforcement located the car abandoned in a parking lot in Jupiter, Florida. Inside the vehicle, they discovered traces of Gretchen's blood and additional evidence pointing to foul play. The car became another key piece in the puzzle, tying David directly to the events surrounding Gretchen's disappearance. As law enforcement closed in, David's behavior became increasingly erratic. By the end of March, he had fled Jupiter and was tracked heading north, eventually reaching Las Cruces, New Mexico. His sudden departure from Florida and continued use of Gretchen's credit cards during his journey further implicated him. On March 31, 2020, police in Las Cruces apprehended David during a routine traffic stop. In his possession were several items belonging to Gretchen, including her credit cards and personal belongings. Forensic analysis of his vehicle and clothing provided further links to the crime. Despite initially denying involvement, the mounting evidence eventually led David to admit his role in Gretchen's death. He confessed to luring her to the house under the pretense of discussing their divorce. The encounter escalated into a violent confrontation, culminating in her murder. David's attempts to stage her disappearance, including sending false COVID-19 messages and fleeing the state, were part of an elaborate plan to evade accountability. However, his efforts to conceal the truth ultimately unraveled, exposing the calculated and cold-blooded nature of his actions. This chapter of the investigation revealed not only David's involvement, but also the lengths he went to in order to cover up his crime. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of a man willing to manipulate and destroy lives to maintain control and avoid consequences. After David Anthony's arrest in March 2020, Law enforcement and prosecutors began preparing a case that would expose the full extent of his betrayal. Although he had confessed to key elements of Gretchen's murder, David's efforts to minimize his culpability and evade justice continued throughout the legal proceedings. What followed was a methodical unraveling of his lies and a relentless pursuit of accountability. David was extradited to Florida to face charges of second-degree murder and kidnapping. Prosecutors alleged that David had premeditated the attack on Gretchen, luring her to her home under the pretense of discussing their divorce. Once there, he ambushed her, escalating the encounter into a violent confrontation. Despite his initial denial of any involvement, the overwhelming evidence left him with little room to maneuver. As the case moved through the legal system, David attempted to portray himself as a victim of circumstance, blaming his actions on the stress of the pandemic and his deteriorating mental health. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled these claims by presenting a trove of evidence that demonstrated premeditation and deliberate attempts to cover up the crime. Surveillance footage from Gretchen's home, records of his erratic movements, and forensic findings from her abandoned car left no doubt about his guilt. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence presented during the proceedings was Gretchen's own voice, captured by her home security system. In the moments before her death, she could be heard pleading for her life, her cries cutting through the courtroom and leaving a lasting impact on everyone present. This haunting audio underscored the brutality of David's actions and reinforced the prosecution's argument that this was not an impulsive act, but a calculated and violent betrayal. In an effort to avoid the uncertainty of a jury trial and the possibility of a harsher sentence, David Anthony entered a plea agreement in December 2020. As part of the agreement, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and the charge of kidnapping was dropped. In exchange, David was sentenced to 38 years in prison, ensuring he would remain incarcerated for the foreseeable future. While the plea deal provided some closure, it was a bittersweet outcome for Gretchen's family and friends. Many believed that David deserved a harsher sentence, given the calculated nature of his crime and the pain he inflicted on Gretchen and those who loved her. However, the agreement spared the family the anguish of a lengthy trial and the potential risks associated with presenting the case to a jury. Following the sentencing, Gretchen's family spoke publicly about their loss, describing her as a loving mother, a loyal friend, and a kind soul whose life was cut short by an act of unimaginable betrayal. They expressed gratitude to law enforcement and prosecutors for their diligence in securing justice, while also emphasizing the importance of remembering Gretchen as more than a victim. Her memory, they said, would live on through the countless lives she had touched during her lifetime. For David Anthony, the courtroom marked the beginning of his life behind bars. Stripped of the control and manipulation he had wielded so effectively in the past, he was left to face the consequences of his actions in isolation. Despite his sentence, the scars of his betrayal remained deeply etched in the lives of those who loved Gretchen, serving as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of domestic violence and the lengths to which some will go to avoid accountability. The murder of Gretchen Anthony left a permanent mark on her family, friends, and the Jupiter, Florida community. Her death was a heartbreaking reminder of the dangers posed by domestic violence and the devastating consequences of unchecked control and manipulation. While David Anthony's conviction provided a sense of closure, the pain of losing Gretchen continues to ripple through the lives of those who knew and loved her. Her teenage daughter, who lost her mother in such a violent and public way, has been left to navigate life without Gretchen's love and guidance. For law enforcement and prosecutors who worked tirelessly on the case, Gretchen Anthony's murder remains a haunting reminder of the stakes involved in domestic disputes. Despite David Anthony's conviction, the case underscored the challenges of addressing domestic violence. Her legacy lives on in the efforts to protect others from suffering a similar fate, ensuring that her story serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to action. What are your thoughts on the tragic case of Gretchen Anthony? Do you believe enough is being done to protect victims of domestic violence? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories that shed light on the darkest corners of humanity.